The sheer amount of different combat skills we have at our disposal is staggering, but not always fairly distributed. Here's an example. Sky Rapture is one of my favorite skills in the game, hands down. It's rarely useful late game, but it makes you feel badass. Then we got HFB, the ultimate newbie shotgun, insane damage and the ability to bypass even walls. Not to mention the low stamina cost. It's not even a proper skill, but a core skill that gets out of hand when enchanted with holy magic. On top of that, it just makes your finger hurt like hell after a while. Anyway, we'll only look at the upgraded level of each skill and of course showcase all of the tier 3 skills attainable with special rings and bands as well. This is a skill and you should never use it. Trust me, running towards a dragon and sliding while doing no damage, it's just gonna make you look stupid. This increases your strength but lowers your defense. You are really better off just popping a Periapt. It's decent, but not really worth one of your 3 skill slots as a fighter. These both launch an ally up in the air for climbing big monsters. Could be useful if your pawns knew how to use it. Hopefully this gets improved in the sequel since it's a cool skill. I think the only time I ever used this skill is in the tutorial, but I'll give it some points for style though. Remember, you have only 3 skill slots as a warrior. This is not one of them. Useful to get those pesky harpies to attack you. Also great for keeping aggro in a party. Only really useful until you get your full moon slash in order. Used to break the guard of shielded enemies, this tier 3 skill can also increase your damage if it's a counter, which is cool. Very useful early on, especially when hunting down wolves. Later on, its wind-up animation is just too long for it to be effective. Using a rusted bow will actually induce torpor faster and frees up a skill slot. This is basically steel will, but for your party. The thing is, as a magic archer, your enemies never get to your allies in the first place, since you can pretty much destroy anything in Bitter Black Isle with this class. Remember when you got that gun that would pierce enemies in Resident Evil? And it was pretty cool. Well, this is like that, but in Dragon's Dogma, enemies rarely line up for you, so yeah, don't use it. Dodge while blocking. This should be a fighter skill, right? Believe it or not, the 3rd tier of this skill makes it a little brighter. You can become a vampire with this skill and siphon the health of decomposing enemies if you're into that sort of thing. Actually, not a bad skill for a warrior. You need to be super close to your enemy to connect though. And why are you not using jumping attacks instead? The only reason I don't like this is that you can't get the eminence boost when using this skill. Good against skellies and if you want to do a Spartan cosplay. Now this skill I can get behind. It's a classic barbarian charge with a strong finishing blow. It's actually possible to cancel the charge to quickly dish out punishment with this skill. This is a strange one. During the charging of the spell, the Risen and your party gain stamina quickly, but when the spell is over, your stamina depletes, leaving you vulnerable. Let me know if you guys found any use of this skill. An advanced form of whistle dart that emits a louder cry to stun still more enemies. Yeah, the description is pretty spot on. Send your enemies flying with this upward strike. It's kinda useful sometimes. This skill is great when facing a horde of archers or spellcasters, since the magical barrier nullifies the impact and stamina damage from all projectiles. Still haven't found a scenario when this was very useful though. The invocation spells buff the Arisen and their party for a shorter time than normal enchantments, but since the whole team gets buffed at the same time, you can get a great boost in DPS versus any enemy. If you enjoy pinning enemies to walls, this skill is for you. The shockwave from this skill will cover a big area around you, dropping even mid-sized enemies to the ground. Not useful on big enemies, but decent at crowd control. The toxin in this arrow will weaken the body part hit on big enemies, resulting in 20% increased damage. Not bad, not very good. This spell will cure any effect on the party that reduces strength or magic attributes. Good to have on a support pawn. The 3rd tier of these skills are pretty decent, but with the longer cast times, it's often better to opt for the higher level spells instead. It blocks a lot of attacks, but will not block a ghost's charge, implicate or boulders. Hope they buff this in the sequel. The strongest version of this skill will launch even mid-sized enemies for a follow-up attack in the air. It's one of those skills that feels really good. Trust me, just try it on a giant Saurian. Great for a necromancer cosplay, and useful as a preemptive tactic before entering a room full of enemies. These skills both do the same thing, but Vortex Trail sucks more. A classic speed boost, great for increasing your DPS in any situation really. Great if you play your MK tactically. You can now heal white damage with perfect blocks. Great for dispatching Cyclops and tall enemies. This is probably the coolest magic archer skill, but also one of the least useful. Compared to the short bow version of this skill, Fearful Din can actually launch even mid-sized enemies on direct impact. Pretty useful. Set yourself ablaze and basically become a living fireball. Great for a Sisu cosplay, I guess. This is basically your bread and butter for any warrior build, and that leaves us with only 2 other skills in our arsenal in combat. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Itsuno. This skill recently ascended with the discovery of an exploit that lets you harness the power of Death himself. I'm not gonna get into the details though, Gamma explains it well in his video. The only thing you need to know is that this skill is now renamed Act of Extinction, which is pretty badass. One of the most powerful skills in the game, also requires powerful patience, which I don't have. This skill turns your Arisen into an anime character. Imagine how scary this looks for your enemies. Not only is this skill great for defense, but it will do some pretty decent DPS as well. Launch smaller sized enemies with a spicy finisher, good for taking out corrupted pawns. For some reason this skill is incredibly satisfying to use, but that's about it. The reason enchantments are so much higher in the list is that you can effectively enchant your own staff with holy magic and turn your sorcerer into a destroyer of worlds. Seriously kids, don't do HFB. The skill is decent for a warrior on a budget, but you'll get more powerful options of course. Launch a bunch of small bombs on your enemy that can only be triggered by a physical attack. Yeah, it's strange I know, but effective in many situations. The best skill for getting those annoying upgrade materials, but you're not gonna equip this when facing true challenges. This skill is basically an on-demand Panaka for the whole team. Great for a support build, your go-to method for inflicting torpor on your enemies, setting you up for casting more powerful spells while your enemy is slowed down. Amazing in tandem with blast arrows, but also great for putting debilitations on your enemies. Nihil's favorite skill. Enough said. Not only is this skill very fun to use, it's got great DPS potential and works really well when targeting a dragon's heart. This is Soul Skewer at home, good for stunning medium-sized enemies. Very useful for pinning down enemies at bottlenecks. Bigger enemies will be slowed instead, which is a nice touch. There it is, the most badass skill out there. I had to put it in my top 50 at least. It might not look good on paper, but try it out and you'll see. A quick tip is to jump before activating the skill, resulting in a much faster attack animation. Miasma is actually the only spell that deals neutral damage, making it effective against all foes and will also poison enemies that linger in the fog for too long. On paper, this skill is the most powerful single strike for a longsword in the game, but good luck hitting anything with it. These spells will both debilitate your enemy, but it's cast right on the player, making it much more difficult to use safely in combat for a caster. The tier 3 skill is actually dealing less damage to enemies with high defense, but with a much faster animation to make up for it. If you want to feel like a badass spellblade, this skill will satisfy your needs and decimate your foes. Both stylish and useful for knocking down big enemies off balance, just a great skill overall. Both are powerful charge-up skills for your preferred archer, but I'll give the edge to Terrible Bend for its higher DPS without the need for good timing. If you want to play a sword and bow assassin, you're gonna appreciate this defensive skill in your arsenal. Sick style, but you'll be vulnerable during the animation. Great skill when close up to your enemy as an archer. You'll only need one petrifying arrow to take out a Garm with this skill. It's pretty powerful as long as you have debilitating arrows with you. This skill will charge up when deflecting damage and release a powerful barrage of dark magic when released. It's a very fun skill to use and incredibly strong early on in the game. The king of iframe skills. The animation is so long that you can completely bypass a dragon's breath attack and get out of many sticky situations with the same mechanic as Full Moon Slash. The skill will pin down even mid-sized enemies with a guaranteed knockdown on the final hit. Again, great for your Spartan cosplay. One of these 3 spells will usually be your main form of attack when going solo as a sorcerer. Great damage and versatility against most enemies. This skill is pretty crazy, because in addition to being invisible, the devs thought it would be wise to make us invincible as well. Yeah, you can basically become the Seneschal for 20 seconds without drawbacks. Antler Toss is such a simple skill, really, but it does its job brilliantly. Great knockdown and high DPS when attacking enemy weak spots. It's a must-have for any sword enjoyer. This is your go-to skill for iframes when armed with the sword. fast and reliable. I've got to give this skill the #1 spot for style points. It's very satisfying to use in combat, great on their own, but when used in tandem, these skills really shine. Set out 2 great cannons and put down a sigil to create your own makeshift sentry turret. This is such an underrated skill. The damage might be low, but it's packing some amazing knockdown power. With it, you'll be able to take down Silver Knights, Skeleton Brutes, and Poisoned Undead with ease. Probably the spell that gets memed on the most, with good reason. When using this skill, you can basically say goodbye to any enemy in the room, as well as your ability to see shit on the screen for 30 seconds. You probably wonder why the feint counter skills are so high up on this list. Well, just buff your shield with Holy, put down some cannons, and you got yourself a machine gun firing Holy Retribution. This is a simple skill that lets you feel like a very powerful assassin. What makes this buff unique is the fact that you can put it on top of an existing enchantment for some ridiculous damage output. Both are amazing skills for sniping out enemies from afar. It's so powerful actually that you rarely will need to fight any monster if you don't want to, so use it with care. Another really strong skill for your fighter. I would say on a skilled player this is much more effective than even Dragon's Maw, both for damage and knockdown, not to mention style points of course. The fact that you can use this skill with blast arrows is just insane. Even without, you can probably take out a Gore Chimera with 1 cast. The devs went crazy with this one. Now, Magic Archer already has got some of the most powerful skills in the game in their arsenal. Giving them an ability that lets them buff 4 times for a whopping 100% damage increase is just absurd. The Ultimate Ranger skill. It scales greatly with your remaining stamina when activating it, and with the correct setup can deal up to 40,000 damage in a single shot. These 3 spells are incredibly powerful and can only be unlocked with the corresponding tier 3 rings. Pop out the Grand Fulmination with a team of climbers and watch your enemies get disintegrated. The Ultimate Warrior skill. While charging, you'll receive strong damage and knockdown resistance, and when fully charged, it will send even the most powerful foes flying. It's your most powerful DPS when climbing monsters with a sword. The second tier of this skill will strangely deal more damage though, so use that instead. This skill is capable of completely destroying big monsters when used point blank. I just call it the shotgun. This is in my opinion the ultimate sorcerer's spell, just the way you start levitating when charging it up while summoning hellfire from above. 10 out of 10, can't wait to use this again in the sequel. It's your main DPS when fighting any large monster, but compared to Gouge, you can actually use this on foot as well, making it much more versatile. I still don't understand how such a powerful skill got a tier 3 upgrade for it in Dark Arisen. It's simply the most damaging melee skill in the game, hands down. Equip blast arrows and watch everything in sight just die. The offensive output of this skill is so high that you can take down even the most powerful foes in only seconds with a maximized build. Again, I'm looking at you, Itsuno. Not only does this skill give some good Ratchet & Clank vibes, it works incredibly well all throughout Bitblock Isle with its tight corridors and rooms. A beast of a skill when optimized, but rather weak when used outside. The only reason this skill doesn't get the #1 spot is that you'll have to sacrifice your pawn when using it. The trade-off is the ultimate damage. Although I don't really use this skill that often, I can't deny how powerful this is on any build utilizing daggers. It's basically a cheat code that lets you reset not only your own actions, but also recover from actions inflicted by foes such as stagger and knockdown. You can also aid your pawns incredibly fast using this skill. It's of course an essential skill for speedrunners as well, and ultimately perhaps the single most useful skill in the game.